Hello, I'm Fiona, and in this video I want to demonstrate how to work the long tail or thumb cast on in the English method. So this is an example of a piece of knitting using the long tail cast on, and it's been worked with this being the right side, the purl bumps being visible so that it looks as though you've just started straight into the garter stitch. If I turn it over, you can see the bottom edge here, which is looking at the wrong side from the way that I'm using it. So I'll just take that out of the way. So this particular cast on uses one needle and your thumb. It also requires you to measure off a length of yarn before you start. You need a long tail. The tail needs to be at least 3 times the width of the piece of knitting that you want to finish up with, plus a bit. I know that sounds a bit vague, but that's basically the recommendation. Generally speaking, if you want to cast on a large number of stitches, rather than using a long tail, I would actually use 2 balls of yarn. So one ball of yarn would be my tail and one ball of yarn would be my working yarn. So with the English method, you would normally measure off a length of the yarn and then make a slip knot part way along the yarn and place the slip knot onto your right needle. So the slip knot is on my right needle, the working yarn is in my right hand, and the tail yarn is in my left hand. So I'm holding on to the tail, and then I'm going to be able to wrap the yarn around my thumb. So I'm wrapping it from outside of the thumb to the inside to make a loop. I then insert the needle, the right needle, into the loop, and holding the needle point with my left hand between the thumb and forefinger, take the yarn around the point of the needle and lift the loop over the point off my thumb and pull the tail yarn tight. So wrap the yarn around my thumb to make a loop, go into the thumb loop, take the yarn around the point of the needle, lift the loop over the point of the needle and off your thumb and pull the tail tight. One of the problems with this cast on when you first learn it is trying to get an even spread of stitches, because you have to control how you place the stitches on the needle. But with practice it does become quite easy. So yarn around my thumb, into the loop, take the yarn around the point of the needle, lift the loop over the needle and off my thumb and pull the yarn tight. Keep on doing this for however many stitches you need. You are effectively working the first row, which would be, if this was the right side, this would be a knit row, because when we come to actually work the first row, you have a row of purl bumps along this bottom edge. So if I now start working my first row, I'm going to work it as a knit row. I quite often use this method of casting on if I want to make a piece where the knitting starts with a garter stitch edging. By working the garter stitch edging, so if I knit another row here, and assuming that the purl side or the bump side of the cast on is going to be my right side, as shown in the example right at the beginning, it makes the knitting look as though it has just started in garter stitch. Again, because I'm using a chunky yarn, I'm just going to pull the edge slightly to make sure that the cast on edge is the same length as the rest of the knitting. And as you can see here, you've got your cast on edge with your purl bumps, and then a ridge of garter stitch because I've worked 2 rows of knit. You will find quite often in British patterns that they will state that the cast on, you should use the thumb cast on and then work the first row as a wrong side row. In that case you would end up with this edge as the bottom edge of your knitting. Personally, I prefer to use this cast on with garter stitch or moss stitch because I like that garter edge at the bottom. And I will just show you an example of a garment here. So this is a garment which is in my book Knitting with Beads, and the bottom edge is worked in moss stitch. So I've worked the thumb cast on to give me purl bumps along the bottom edge, which blends into the moss stitch at the bottom to give a nice neat finish. This cast on is also often used because it has a little bit more flexibility than some of the other cast ons like the cable cast on. But it's a good all-round cast on. The other point that's useful to remember is that the tail end is at the same end as the working yarn at the beginning of a right side row if you're working with the edge having the purl bumps showing. So that's how to work the long tail or thumb cast on using the English method.